Bernardo had never been handsome. His face was marked by rough features, his body worn out from battling sun and dust every single day, and his clumsy way of moving made others laugh behind his back. But if there was one thing no one could deny, it was the size of his heart. He woke up before the sun, worked as a bricklayer until his body begged for mercy, and came home only to throw his kids into his arms, kiss his wife's forehead, and cook dinner with his calloused hands. For him, happiness lived in that small home with a tin roof and the smell of simple food. He deeply loved his wife, Lívia, and was completely devoted to their two little children, Bianca and Benicio. When Bernardo looked at them, even covered in cement and sweat, he felt like the richest man in the world. At first, Lívia seemed to see that. She said she loved his honest ways, his dedication. But the years passed, and with them came the bills, the frustrations, the cruel comparisons. While her friends posted pictures from resorts and dined on rooftops, she wore market stall clothes and walked to church on foot. Vanity began to triumph over love. Lívia, beautiful, young and vain, began to see in Bernardo the reflection of a life she wanted to escape. And even if he didn't notice it, her hugs were growing colder, her kisses more rushed. Still, Bernardo kept believing. He had faith. Faith in God, faith in family, faith that all of it was just a hard phase they would overcome together. But life has cruel ways of showing when love turns into contempt. And even on the days when Bernardo came home with a small gift, a cheap treat for the kids' snack, or a rose stolen from a random garden just to make Lívia smile, what he got in return was a look of impatience, as if the gesture were ridiculous. But he wouldn't give up. No matter how visible the signs were, like graffiti on a wall, he kept believing love would hold strong. Because to Bernardo, love wasn't about beauty or status. It was about care, presence, giving, and those he had in abundance. Even on weekends, when other families went out to malls and restaurants, Bernardo made up picnics in the backyard, with a bedsheet spread on the ground, mortadella sandwiches, and made up stories. The kids laughed as if they were in the most expensive park in the world. Lívia sometimes smiled too, but the sparkle in her eyes was no longer the same. And no matter how much Bernardo tried to fool himself, he felt that something inside her was breaking, or worse, fading away. The house remained clean, the food still came hot, but the silence between them grew louder each day. Bernardo began to listen to her phone calls with more suspicion. Her delays returning from work, the deleted messages on her phone, the shifts in her mood. But he chose silence. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to lose. He refused to believe that the love he nurtured with so much sacrifice could die. Maybe because, deep down, he believed that true love could survive anything, even indifference. In that humble home, surrounded by thin walls and dreams too big for the space, Bernardo was the pillar, the foundation, the base. But even the strongest foundation can collapse when the person you love the most starts digging a hole right in the center of your heart. And what Bernardo didn't know, or refused to see, was that Lívia had already started digging. She had chosen another path, and that path no longer passed through him. Lívia worked as a receptionist at a high-end aesthetic clinic in the city center. There, surrounded by well-dressed women, imported cars, and expensive perfumes, she often felt like an intruder in her simple blouse and worn-out sneakers. But it was also in that environment that her desire for a different life began to ferment silently. Every day, she saw couples who looked like they had stepped out of magazine covers, saw women with designer handbags being picked up by husbands in suits and gold watches. And the more she saw, the more she asked herself why she was stuck in a life of sacrifice beside a man who could barely pay the electric bill on time. Even with two beautiful and healthy children, even knowing Bernardo gave all of himself, she wanted more. Then, on a rainy Monday, he walked through the clinic's glass door. Tall, defined body, perfectly styled hair, and a smile that looked sculpted by an artist. Raphael, a name as imposing as his presence. Owner of a chain of gyms, supplement entrepreneur, fitness influencer, millionaire, and desired by every woman who stepped into that reception. He was there to finalize a body aesthetics partnership with the clinic. When Lívia saw him, the world seemed to slow down. His beauty was almost aggressive, his confidence hypnotizing, and worst of all, he noticed her. The first day, it was just a smile. The second, a compliment. The third, a coffee together during lunch. Raphael was a born seducer. He knew the weight of words, the exact rhythm of a gaze, the perfect timing to touch her arm and make it seem accidental. He told her she deserved more from life, that she was too beautiful to live hidden in a dull marriage with a man who looked like her uncle. Lívia, already fragile, fell like a stone into the abyss. She began hiding her phone, taking longer showers, avoiding Bernardo on Sunday nights. It was as if Raphael's shine had extinguished any remaining spark of gratitude she felt for the father of her children. Raphael started picking her up from work in his convertible. He took her to expensive restaurants, hotels with ocean views, parties filled with beautiful people and pricey drinks. For the first time in her life, Lívia felt desired in a way that made her forget who she was. She forgot she had 2 small children at home, a husband who cooked with love, a simple home built with sweat-soaked bricks. She only wanted to live that intoxicating passion, that adventure that felt like a movie. And even when guilt weighed down on her, all it took was one look from Raphael for everything to seem justifiable again. He said she deserved more, and she started to believe it. The betrayal, which began as emotional, soon turned physical, and then it became constant. Lívia started sleeping out of the house with flimsy excuses, said she was at her mother's with a friend, working a late shift. Bernardo, increasingly suspicious, still tried to keep the peace. He didn't want to fight in front of the children, but each of Lívia's lies was another stab in the chest of a man who never understood what he had done wrong, other than not having money, until the inevitable happened. One night, without even waiting for dinner, Lívia packed her bags, kissed the children coldly, told Bernardo she didn't love him anymore, and walked out the door. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She left with the certainty of someone who believes they're trading mud for gold. Little did she know that the shine blinding her was just an illusion reflected in a shattered mirror. And that act, that cold, calculated abandonment, would mark the beginning of a downfall from which she would never fully rise. She thought she was climbing the ladder of life. In truth, she was just about to fall from the highest place, the one where pride resides and conscience can't find the stairs back down. Lívia didn't just cheat, she despised. She despised everything that once held her up, everything that once welcomed her. She despised that man. Yes, unattractive, but full of love for her. She despised the toys scattered across the living room, the colorful drawings taped to the fridge, the smell of rice with garlic in the late afternoon. She left the home like someone trading an old shoe for a sparkling heel, walked out without looking back, leaving Bernardo without solid ground, eyes brimming with tears, and the 2 children asleep in their room without even a goodnight kiss. When Bernardo saw her wardrobe empty, the wedding ring left on the sink, and the slicing silence echoing through the house, he understood. He had been discarded. In the days that followed, the news spread fast. Lívia was now living with Raphael in a luxurious flat in the most expensive neighborhood of the city. She was seen at parties, events, restaurants. She started posting pictures smiling, surrounded by wine glasses and neon lights. The same friends who once shared domestic frustrations now envied her. They said she had pulled off the beauty coup, that she was finally living what she deserved. But what no one saw was that behind the high heels and perfect makeup was a woman who had to convince herself every day that she had made the right choice. Because at night, when Raphael was asleep and she stared at the cold white ceiling of that impersonal flat, the silence reminded her of the children's laughter she had left behind. Bernardo, on the other hand, sank, not out of hatred. He didn't know how to nourish hatred, but out of pain. Lívia's absence was an open wound that stung most when the children asked for her. Benicio cried at night, calling for his mother. Bianca, even being younger, missed her mother's embrace. Bernardo tried to be strong, but the exhaustion piled onto the anguish of having been replaced. He wasn't handsome, never had been, but he had given everything, everything. And to him, that should have been enough, but it wasn't. Lívia didn't check in. She only sent cold messages when she wanted to know if the kids were okay. And even then, she made no effort to see them. She claimed to be too busy. The truth was, Raphael didn't like children. He tolerated their existence like a leftover from a past he preferred to erase. And Lívia, to please him, silenced her maternal instinct and smiled to keep the magic alive. She was in love, or rather, she was blind. She believed Raphael was her redemption, her chance to be more than a bricklayer's wife, more than an invisible woman in a cramped house. She wanted to be a queen, and she thought Raphael was the castle. But castles made of glass don't survive the slightest tremor. And what seemed like a fairy tale was actually an unsigned contract, an adventure without guarantees. Raphael didn't make plans with her. He never spoke of marriage, never suggested kids, never introduced her to his family. Everything was temporary, immediate, superficial. She, however, pretended not to notice. She was enchanted by the brand new car, the fancy dinners, the feeling of being desired by a man every woman wanted. And no matter how much she missed her children, she drowned that feeling in makeup, wine, and French perfume. Meanwhile, Bernardo did what he could. He became both father and mother, learned how to do his daughter's hair, how to handle fevers, how to pack school lunches. The neighbors started helping him. They ironed clothes for him, brought over cakes, offered a hug, because everyone could see that man was wounded, but not broken. He bore the burden with dignity. Never spoke ill of his ex, never spread hate, even though he had every reason to. And it was in that quiet pain and silent resilience that admiration for him began to grow. Lívia, across town, still believed she had won, that she had climbed the social ladder, that the family man she left behind was just a shadow from her past. She didn't yet know that the shine blinding her was fake, and that when the lights went out, there would be no home, no arms, no children, no respect left where she could hide. Lívia woke up alone that morning. The pillow beside her still held the strong scent of Raphael's cologne, but he had already left, just as he had been doing for the past few weeks. The routine had shifted subtly. The flowers had disappeared. The dinners became rare. The compliments faded. And in a nearly imperceptible way, Raphael began treating her like a long-term guest. She, however, tried to pretend it was just a phase, tried to convince herself that every relationship matures, that the initial fire gives way to calm waters. But deep down, something was screaming. The magic was unraveling. The breaking point came on a Friday night. She dressed up like never before. Tight dress, new heels, hair done at the salon. She was hoping for a dinner with Raphael, like the old times, as if there were even old times between them. But he arrived late, with a stern face, dismissed dinner, and said only, "Lívia, I think it's time for you to go back to your life." The silence that followed was deafening. She didn't understand at first, thought it was a joke, but his gaze was serious, cold, surgical. Raphael explained it with the same ease someone uses to comment on the weather. He had never promised marriage, never spoken of a future. He said he liked her, sure, but the way one likes a good song, you listen, enjoy it, but eventually get tired. Lívia fell apart. She cried, begged, screamed, asked if there was someone else. He didn't answer, just said he needed space, that she had gotten too attached, that it wasn't his fault. And then, like someone closing a door without caring what's on the other side, he walked out, left her there, made up, dressed up, alone, sitting on the couch of an apartment that had never been hers. The pain came like an avalanche. It wasn't just the end of an affair, it was the collapse of an illusion. She had traded the man who loved her for a dream that now spit out her presence like an inconvenience. That night, Lívia didn't sleep. She sat there until daylight. When she tried to call Raphael, he didn't answer. He sent a short message, "Don't make this harder. Life moves on," and blocked her. No talk, no explanation, no respect. She had been just another one, another on his list, another woman who believed she was special. What she didn't know was that to men like Raphael, special is the one who leaves first. And she stayed. She gave herself. She believed. And now she was alone. No lover, no children, no husband, no home, nothing. Shame consumed her. Returning to her mother's house was humiliating but necessary. Her friends vanished. Her co-workers whispered. The same world that once applauded her boldness now treated her like a punchline. She dumped the ugly guy for the hot one, and got dumped. She heard it everywhere. But worse was yet to come. The loneliness of nights, the absence of her children, the emptiness in bed, the regret, sharp as a blade. And in the middle of that emotional abyss came the inevitable thought, would Bernardo ever forgive me? She spent days rehearsing a message, thought about showing up by surprise, but deep down, she knew she was no longer welcome, knew she had destroyed a home on a whim, knew that the simple, unattractive, kind man she had humiliated was now the only one who could make her feel truly loved again. But men like Bernardo, when they learn to love themselves, don't go back to those who shattered them. And that, she was about to learn. Lívia now lived in her childhood bedroom, cramped and uncomfortable, back in her mother's house. The walls, once covered in posters of teenage bands, now seemed to scream silent ironies. Everything there felt like a cruel regression. Every corner of the house whispered memories of a past she had tried to erase. The days when Bernardo would pick her up on a motorcycle with worn-out helmets. The Sundays they spent dreaming about owning a home. The plans to build a life together that now lay in ruins. Except that life still existed. It just existed without her. The days dragged on. Raphael's messages never returned. The friends who once flooded her DMs vanished like smoke. The bank account that used to overflow with the millionaire's gifts now barely covered basic needs. The money ran out. The illusion dissolved like foam in the wind. And when pride deflated, instinct screamed louder. She needed to see her children. She needed to smell them, hear their voices, touch their faces. She went to the school, hoping for a glimpse, an encounter. But when Bianca saw her, she didn't run into her mother's arms. She hesitated, looked, then turned her face and ran to her father, waiting on the other side of the gate. Benicio, more sensitive, waved his hand, but didn't let go of Bernardo's. That hurt more than any rejection from Raphael. Lívia tried to respond. She called Bernardo, tried to talk, but he, calm and composed, simply said, "They're fine, don't worry," and hung up. It was like a slap with a glove of silence. She, who had once been the lady of the house, the queen of that home, was now not even welcome on the porch. She tried appealing to Bernardo's mother, to mutual friends, but everyone knew the truth. Everyone judged her, even if they said nothing. The world did not forgive her, not even the eyes of children in the street. It was as if her betrayal had become public, spread in the air like scandal dust that never settles. Without steady work, without support, without affection, Lívia sank into grey days. She spent hours staring at old photos on her phone. Bianca's first birthday, with Bernardo holding the cake. The first time Benicio rode a bike with training wheels. The simple afternoons in the backyard, where the four of them played hide and seek among the plants. Every image was a fresh wound, and the more it hurt, the more she hated herself. She began to wonder if it was already too late, if forgiveness even existed for those who destroy their own homes out of vanity. It was then she decided to try the impossible, to win Bernardo back. She thought an apology would be enough, that the fact they had children would be bridge enough, that the history they had shared was too deep to die like this. But what she didn't know, or pretended not to, is that some mistakes change people irreversibly. Bernardo was no longer the man who cried silently over a cold plate at the table. He was someone else now. A firm father, a man rebuilt through pain, a rock that had learned to live without her. And when she finally found the courage to go to his house, to knock on the door with teary eyes and a trembling voice, what she found was a calm man. He opened the door, looked into her eyes, and said with painful kindness, "You chose your path, and I chose mine." He didn't yell. He didn't humiliate her. He simply closed the door slowly, with the children watching cartoons on the sofa, laughing as if nothing had been lost. And maybe nothing had. Maybe the only part truly corrupted in that whole story was her. While Lívia wasted away between crumpled sheets and sleepless nights, living off remorse and silence, Bernardo was writing a new chapter with the same calloused hands as always, but now steadier than ever. He no longer cried. Mourning had turned into discipline, abandonment into strength, and pain. Pain he had turned into fuel. Bernardo still woke up early, but now with two pairs of attentive eyes watching him. He made breakfast for the children, carefully combed his daughter's hair, even if he messed up the buns at first. He took Benicio to school on the back of his bike and rode home humming a church hymn under his breath. He didn't have time anymore to dwell on longing. He had to be the hero his children needed, and he was willing to be that every single day. Bills were still tight. His salary as a bricklayer barely covered the basics, but Bernardo always found a way. He started picking up renovation jobs on the weekends, learned how to make desserts with his mother, and began selling cake jars at the school gate. The neighbors helped with small donations, but never out of pity, out of respect, because they saw something rare in that man, dignity intact, even after humiliation. He never spoke ill of Lívia, not once. When the children asked about their mother, he replied gently that she was taking care of important things, but loved them. And as he said that, he swallowed the bitter taste of the truth. He didn't know if that was still true. The house came alive. Bernardo painted the walls with new colors, hung his children's drawings on the cabinets, turned the living room into a playground, and the backyard into a party every evening. Laughter returned to echo through the space. Bianca, with her curly hair and free-spirited giggle, was the soul of the home. Benicio, more sensitive, clung to his father as if holding the world in both hands. And Bernardo, though exhausted, smiled, because now he had something not even all of Raphael's money could buy: peace. It was a peace full of children's noise, of dirty dishes, of sleepless nights, but it was peace. The old photos were taken down. The bed sheets bought by Lívia were replaced with floral quilts made by Bernardo's mother. The objects that reminded him of the past were discreetly donated. There was no more space for any of that, because in that modest house now lived a new family, a new home, rebuilt not with bricks, but with forgiveness, love, and truth. And though deep inside Bernardo carried wounds that would never fully heal, he chose to move on, chose not to let hatred take hold of him. Because he knew whoever clings too tightly to resentment doesn't have free hands to hold their children. The neighbors began to admire him. The school mums would comment on how he managed everything. The teachers said his children were polite, happy, affectionate. The neighborhood social worker even praised the emotional stability of the home. Bernardo, in his simple way, became a reference, an example, and without realizing it, became desirable too. Glances began to appear, coffee invitations, subtle compliments, but he still carried the caution of someone whose heart had been trampled. He didn't want to mistake attention for affection. He didn't want to confuse kindness with compensation. Not yet. Meanwhile, Lívia crumbled with every new update. When she saw, through the school's social media, a photo of her children dressed in traditional attire for the June festival, with Bernardo smiling in the background, her stomach turned. They weren't sad. They weren't missing her. They were fine. They were better. Her absence wasn't felt the way she imagined, and that truth hurt more than any closed door. It was the silent punishment of someone who hadn't been kicked out, but simply replaced by peace. It was on a sunny and serene Saturday morning that Lívia decided to do what had been hammering in her mind for weeks: go to the house that was once hers and ask to come back. She woke up early, tied her hair in a simple bun, put on the light blue blouse Bernardo used to like, and sprayed a gentle perfume, not the sweet and cloying one Raphael preferred, but the old familiar scent, the one Bernardo said smelled like field flowers after rain. She faced the mirror with a knot in her throat and left the house trembling inside, but determined. It was no longer pride. It was desperation. It was longing. It was regret piled high and overflowing through her eyes. When she arrived at the old house, the gate was open. The laughter of children came from the backyard. Lívia's heart raced. She moved forward slowly, afraid to be seen, yet hoping to be. And then, as she rounded the side corridor, she saw the scene that shattered her from the inside. Bernardo sitting in a plastic chair, laughing with the children on his lap, playing airplane with Benicio, while Bianca clipped colorful hairpins into his hair. The peace in that scene hit like a punch to the stomach. That family existed without her. She couldn't hold the impulse. She called his name. Bernardo looked. His expression grew serious. The children stopped. An uncomfortable silence took over. She took 2 steps forward, voice trembling. "I needed to see you." Bernardo stood slowly. calmly asked the children to go inside. They obeyed, but before going, Bianca asked, "Daddy, is she going to stay?" Bernardo just smiled at his daughter and said, "Go on, sweetheart." When the door closed, he looked at Lívia with different eyes. Not of anger, but of distance. The eyes of someone who's no longer there. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. She said she missed the kids, that she was sorry, that she got confused, that Raphael was a lie, that she was alone, that she had realized Bernardo was the love of her life. She spoke with her soul exposed, tears cutting through her makeup and knees trembling. She said she wanted to come back, that she was ready to start over, his way, their way, that she missed the smell of the house, the taste of rice and eggs, the simplicity of real life. Bernardo listened silently. He didn't look away, but he didn't cry either. When she finished, he took a deep breath and answered with the serenity of someone who had suffered enough not to bleed anymore. "You don't want to come back to me. You want to come back to who I was. But that man died when you turned your back on him." She choked, tried to justify herself, to say everyone makes mistakes, that she had been weak, blind, but he just shook his head and added, "I don't hate you, Lívia. I wish you no harm. But now, there's no room for you here." She tried to approach, to touch him, but he stepped back, and in that gesture, more than any word, she understood. The heart she had shattered had rebuilt itself, but in another direction, with new pieces, and she was no longer one of them. Bernardo said the children could see her, that he wouldn't keep them from her, but any interaction would be mediated. He didn't want fights or drama, just peace. And for that reason, the door she had abandoned now needed to stay closed. Lívia staggered away. Face soaked with regret, she crossed the gate with unsteady steps and a crushed soul. Behind her, the door closed with a dry click. There were no screams, no chaos, only the pain of absolute silence, and the certainty that carved itself into her mind like a final sentence. She was no longer part of that house, nor that story, nor that love she herself destroyed. The visit to Bernardo's house was only the first blow. Lívia believed the strength of the maternal bond would be enough to reclaim her place. After all, she was their mother. She carried them, cared for them in their early years, soothed fevers, and breastfed. But time had passed, and with it, the fragile ties had dissolved like paper in the wind. Lívia decided that if Bernardo no longer accepted her, she would at least demand what she believed was a non-negotiable right: joint custody of the children. And so she went to court. The public defender who assisted her listened patiently, but after reviewing the case file and analyzing the documents, her eyes conveyed what her words tried to soften. It would be difficult, very difficult. Bernardo had held provisional custody since the separation. The children lived with him, were enrolled in nearby schools, had good attendance, were being followed by a municipal psychologist, and, above all, were emotionally stable, all thanks to the father. And that was documented in reports, assessments, and witness statements. Even so, Lívia insisted. She wanted to prove that she had changed, that she could be a present mother again, tried to show that she now had stability, even if that was only half true. She got a temporary job as a clerk, rented a small room in a boarding house to appear more structured, and on the day of the hearing, she showed up with her heart in her hands, believing her tears would weigh more than the truth already told. Bernardo arrived at the courthouse in a clean shirt, but with a serious face. He brought with him a dossier of everything he had endured since the abandonment: photos, school records, children's notes, medical receipts, prescriptions, testimonials from neighbors. He didn't utter a single word against Lívia. He simply stated the facts, showed evidence, and the court, faced with the coldness of paperwork and the clarity of events, had no doubts. The judge was blunt: full custody granted to the father, supervised visitation for the mother, no rights to interfere in school or medical decisions. Lívia couldn't believe it. The decision crushed her like an avalanche. She left the courtroom crying like a child, said it was unfair, that she was the mother, that no one could take her children away. But the truth was something else entirely. She had abandoned them, not for a trip, an illness, or an accident. She left by choice, for passion, for ego, and time. the keeper of all truths, showed no mercy. In the following days, she tried to appeal. But Bernardo's attorney was quick and precise. The ruling stood, and more painful than everything was the practical realization of what it meant. The children now saw Lívia as a visitor, a familiar face, but not essential. They treated her with polite affection, like a distant aunt. There was no longer dependency, no intimacy. One day, Benicio even asked if she would go far away again. And when Lívia hugged Bianca, the girl looked toward her father, as if asking for permission. Lívia began to live for the bi-weekly weekends when she could see her children for a few short hours. But even in those moments, she felt out of place. She no longer knew what they liked, what shows they watched, what they dreamed about. She had no idea of their routines. They talked about friends, school events, favorite meals, and always mentioned Daddy with a sparkle in their eyes. Lívia smiled on the outside, but inside she bled. She was no longer a mother as before. She was a shadow trying to reclaim a place in a picture she herself had torn apart. And every time she saw Bernardo from a distance, steady, present, happy, it was as if life repeated the same verdict. He won because he stayed. It was on an ordinary Tuesday morning that the improbable happened. Bernardo was renovating the garden of a private school, referred by a teacher who admired his dedication. The school was refined, with tall gates, flawless walls, and children dressed in expensive uniforms. While he tended to the flowers and adjusted the stones of a new pathway, a woman sat nearby on a wooden bench, observing from a distance. Her eyes were lost in the void, as if her soul were somewhere far away. She wore elegant but modest clothes and held a crumpled handkerchief in her hand. She was beautiful, a serene, mature beauty, marked by a pain the world had yet to discover. Their first interaction was silent, just a glance. But Bernardo, though used to rejection, felt something strange in that encounter. He didn't feel small, nor ugly, nor out of place. He felt simply seen. In the following days, she appeared again, always quiet, always observing, until one day, in a moment of courage, Bernardo broke the silence. Flowers like it when we look at them calmly. She smiled, a sad yet sincere smile, and in that smile, something was born. Her name was Helena, daughter of entrepreneurs, owner of an art gallery, widowed 4 years ago. She lost her husband in a helicopter accident and, ever since, had lived between the pain of absence and the guilt of moving forward. She had a teenage son, Eduardo, and was known for her quiet generosity. But few knew that behind her fortune lived a shattered woman. When she met Bernardo, she saw something rare in him, a steadiness that didn't intimidate, a strength without arrogance, a care without pretense. They began chatting each time he worked at the school. They shared thoughts about plants, childhood, loss. Helena was surprised by the way Bernardo spoke about his children, with respect, tenderness, pride. And he, in turn, felt he could speak to her without fear of judgment. For the first time, someone listened without correcting, without comparing, without measuring his flaws. It was a clean connection. No agenda, no rush, no tangled past. Just two broken hearts trying to find a place to rest. The meetings became routine. First at the school, then at a simple cafe on the corner, then at a park where the children played. Bernardo once brought Bianca and Benicio without expectations. Helena brought Eduardo, and the improbable happened. The children got along. They laughed together, ran, shared snacks. It was as if the scene had been painted in haste, but perfectly. Helena was charmed by the way Bernardo cared for his kids, and Bernardo admired the way she respected his pain, not trying to erase it, just embracing it. Lívia, from afar, found out through the school. A teacher mentioned that gallery woman was always with Bernardo. She felt a jolt, searched social media, and found a discreet photo. Bernardo, smiling with the kids, and Helena in the background. They weren't hugging, nothing romantic, but the look said it all. She knew. He was falling in love, and worse, with someone who would never humiliate him, with someone who saw the value she never did. The anger, laced with sadness, devoured what little peace Lívia had left. She tried to be closer to the children, tried to be more present, but everything now passed through Bernardo. And he, politely, set boundaries. Want to see them? That's fine, but let's stick to the agreement. She knew she was losing, not just the children, but the man she once stepped on, thinking he'd never rise again. And now, he was being loved, truly, by a woman who didn't need him, but chose to have him near. And that, for Lívia, was the cruelest blow of all. Seeing that the man she once deemed not enough was now everything to someone who could have the world. What began as timid conversations among plants and silences gradually transformed into something deeper, more intimate, more essential. Bernardo and Helena didn't fall in love in a whirlwind of desire or through some cinematic gesture. Their love was born slowly, steadily, like someone rebuilding a house over the rubble of the past. They didn't set out to fall in love. Neither of them was searching for it. But, like all the inevitable things in life, the feeling grew without asking for permission, nurtured by respect, watered with attentive listening, and strengthened by the pure affection that overflowed in the smallest gestures. Helena began visiting Bernardo's house, not as a guest, but as a presence. She helped with the children's routines, brought cakes she baked herself, told stories to Bianca, while Bernardo finished washing the dishes. Benicio began calling her Aunt Lena, and Bernardo didn't correct him. For the first time in a long while, the house breathed harmony again, but now with a new scent, a new color, a new sound. It was a home rebuilt with the lightness of someone who demands nothing, only gives. In their evening conversations when the children were asleep and the street fell quiet, Bernardo and Helena shared their scars. He spoke of betrayal without bitterness, like someone who had already digested the poison. She spoke of the loneliness of being widowed at 37, about having to smile to maintain appearances, about the weight of emptiness even when surrounded by wealth. And there, between confessions and hands that touched by accident, they realized they were healing together. They didn't complete each other, they respected each other. And that was even more powerful. The neighborhood approved. The school mums would comment how Bernardo seemed happier. Bianca's teacher praised how the girl had become more confident, more secure. Even Benicio, once so introspective, now spoke more, laughed more easily. The effect of that new female presence was undeniable. But it was more than that. It was the reflection of an environment free of shouting, demands, or manipulation. There was calm. There was truth. Helena never tried to be a mother. She simply cared with her heart. She took the children to the movies, taught Bianca big words to write in notes for her father, helped Benicio with his math homework. Bernardo watched it all with a lump in his throat. He, who once believed he was unworthy of love again, was now being seen as a whole man. For the first time, someone saw beauty in him. Not beauty of face or body, but the beauty of a soul that had never stopped being loyal, just, and kind. One Sunday afternoon, while walking through the park with the children and Helena, Benicio took Bernardo's hand and softly said, "Daddy, we have a new family now, right?" Bernardo couldn't answer. He swallowed hard. Helena looked at him and smiled, her eyes glistening. It was the confirmation of what they already knew, but had not yet said aloud. Yes, they were a family. Unusual, forged by pain, but more real than many built on appearances. Meanwhile, Lívia watched it all from afar. The photos, the videos, the comments at school, the gazes that avoided her. She knew she had lost something no amount of money could bring back. She tried to console herself, telling herself life goes in circles. But deep down, she knew that circle she had shattered with her own hands. And now, there was no way back. Only the harsh path of regret, flanked by the echo of what she failed to cherish when it mattered most. Time passed with the cruelty of something that does not forgive mistakes. The months moved forward, and with them, Bernardo's new family bloomed like a garden after the storm. Week after week, Lívia watched from afar, another fragment of the life she had let slip through her fingers. A visit to the zoo, a birthday celebration, a video of the children playing with Helena on a golden afternoon, all posted discreetly, without flaunting, yet still visible enough to strike precisely at the soul she had once torn apart. Regret began to hurt more than any abandonment she had ever suffered. It was no longer just about losing the man who had loved her. It was about losing her identity. She was no longer called Mom with intimacy. She was no longer awaited at the school gate. She was no longer drawn into the kids' school pictures. Each time she visited the children on the court-appointed days, she received short, cold, distant hugs. And the worst part, she saw in their eyes a new feminine reference. Bianca called Helena Aunt Lena naturally, but at times slipped and said, "Mom," then quickly took it back, embarrassed. Lívia smiled and pretended not to care, but each of those slips was like a thorn driven into the center of her chest. On social media, the friends who once cheered her on now disappeared. The same ones who once said, "You deserve better," now avoided her. Some had distanced themselves, others just whispered behind her back. Lívia had become an example of what not to do. She was the face of regret, the woman who traded stability for appearances, love for adventure, truth for vanity. She tried to stay strong, but the weight was too much. Her nights became sleepless, filled with memories that now felt like distant dreams. The children's laughter during breakfast, the hugs after school, Bernardo's soft snore as he slept on the couch with the kids in his arms. One night, she drove past her old house. She parked on the upper block and watched from afar. She saw the kitchen light on, heard laughter coming from the backyard. It was popcorn and blanket night. And then, the image that shattered her, Bernardo sitting with the two children beside him, and Helena arriving with a dish in her hands, being greeted with a gentle kiss on the cheek by Bianca. Everything so natural, so beautiful, so distant from her. The pain was so intense Lívia had to rest her head on the steering wheel. She cried alone for long minutes. The cry of someone who knows there's no way back. The cry of someone who lost everything, not by accident, but by choice. The following week, she tried to arrange an extra visit with the kids. Bernardo declined kindly, said it was important to keep their routine stable, without disruptions. She begged, said she wanted to talk to him, just a coffee. He replied firmly, "Lívia, I forgive you, but I don't want to make room for pain anymore." That was final. There were no more openings, no gaps, no cracks. He had sealed his life with another ink, and in this new painting, she was just the shadow of what once was. Lívia tried to rebuild her life, but every man she met felt shallow. None had Bernardo's solidity. None looked into her eyes the way he did. None spoke to children with that same firm tenderness. None would ever love her like he once had. But it was far too late. Because love, once destroyed, may even be reborn, but never in the same place, never with the same people. And now she knew, with the full clarity of truth, she had lost everything forever. The news spread like a warm breeze through a small town. Bernardo was getting married again, but it wasn't just any wedding. It was the public rebirth of a man who, in the eyes of many, had been broken and rebuilt with his own hands. The ceremony would be simple, just as he had always valued, held in the church's community hall, with natural flowers, children running between the pews, and a modest band playing soft songs. Yet despite the simplicity, something grand hovered in the air, something words couldn't fully express. It was the feeling of justice, of a well-earned new beginning, of a clean love blooming where there had once been pain. Helena, in turn, prepared quietly. She didn't want a designer dress or heavy makeup. She wore a flowing white gown, adorned with hand-sewn lace made by local elderly women, and in her hair, she placed a flower picked from Bernardo's garden, the same garden he had nurtured when they first met. It felt like a cycle closing. The wealthy woman, marked by loss, was joining the humble man, shaped by pain, and together, they were building something no money in the world could buy, a home forged in respect and reciprocity. On the day of the wedding, the church was full, not out of obligation, but out of admiration. Neighbor after neighbor, friend after friend, all wanted to witness with their own eyes the happy ending that seemed pulled from a novel, but was real. Bernardo entered with Bianca and Benicio at his side, dressed in a rented suit and holding back tears. Applauded with standing ovation, he walked to the altar, carrying the weight of his journey, every stumble, every silent night he had endured. Helena entered with her son Eduardo, who now saw Bernardo as the father figure he never had. Her eyes searched for Bernardo's, and when they found each other, the world around them faded. This was it. This was the moment. When they held hands, There was no doubt. It wasn't a fleeting passion or a seasonal attraction. It was surrender, a pact, a shared construction. Their vows were simple, without embellishment. I promise to honor your pain and make my presence a place of rest. I promise to care for your children as my own and care for you like one cherishes a rare gift. When the applause came, no one held back their tears. The children clapped with genuine smiles. His co-workers, the teachers from the school, even residents who barely knew Bernardo personally, all were there. And far away, seated in the last pew of the church, was Lívia. She hadn't been invited, but came anyway. She wanted to see. She needed to see. And she saw. She saw the man she once humiliated being honored as an example. She saw the children smiling like never before. She saw the ugly, poor, and simple man being celebrated like a king. And there, in the back of the church, face hidden behind a damp handkerchief, she finally understood. Life charges a high price from those who destroy what is true. Did Bernardo see her? Yes. At one point, their eyes met, but he didn't look away. He didn't smile. He didn't show resentment. He simply looked at her with respectful detachment, as if to say, all is forgiven, but it's over. That was the final unspoken word between them. The closing chapter of what once had been a love story, and now was just a bitter memory locked in the attic of the soul. At the celebration, the children ran, danced, and laughed. Helena danced with Bernardo under simple string lights, and in that slow rhythm, both of them understood. True love doesn't need to come first. It only needs to arrive to stay. Helena never tried to replace anyone. She didn't want to be the new Lívia, nor did she try to force her way into the children's hearts. She knew, as every wise woman does, that love cannot be demanded. It must be built. And that's exactly what she did. She built, brick by brick, gesture by gesture, day after day. She didn't arrive imposing rules, but offering presence. She didn't demand affection, but delivered care. And little by little, she became an essential part of that new family. She became the silent bond that held together the routines, the rituals, the late afternoon hugs. She became home. Bianca started calling her Mommy Lena without being asked. It was spontaneous, natural, almost inevitable. It was in Helena's arms that she fell asleep when afraid. Helena was the one who combed her hair before school, prepared her snacks with little hand-drawn notes, taught her how to write birthday cards. Benicio, more sensitive, found in Helena a patient lap, where his insecurities turned into stories, his drawings into gifts, and his tears, when they came, were wiped away with kisses that needed no explanation. Both children, once wounded, now bloomed under the safe shadow of a new love. Bernardo watched all of it with a full heart. He was afraid at first, afraid to trust again, afraid to see his children form bonds and suffer another loss. But Helena never showed signs of instability. She was there, whole, steady, serene. She never spoke ill of Lívia, never tried to compete for space. She simply cared, with dignity, with balance, with soul. And slowly, Bernardo understood. He had found a woman who knew how to love without destruction, who knew how to heal without judgment, who knew how to stay. At school events, parent-teacher meetings, and holiday celebrations, Helena was called upon. The teachers already recognized her as a mother figure. Other parents approached her to compliment the children's behavior, the family's unity. And Bernardo, though not a man of pride, felt proud. Proud to see that what once seemed impossible was now real. That his story didn't end in betrayal, but was reborn in truth. That his children, even after pain, had found protection. And that he, the unattractive and humble man so many doubted, was now loved by someone who could have chosen any path, and chose to stay. Lívia, in her rare moments with the children, noticed the change. She felt it in their eyes, in their silences, in the little things. She was no longer the absolute mother. She was a fading memory, a name that still caused emotional confusion in the children's minds, but no longer meant home. She would ask, "Do you like her?" And the children would reply, "She's nice, Mummy. She takes care of us." And even with a tight heart, Lívia knew she couldn't compete, because what Helena gave wasn't imposition. It was legitimate love. Helena never flaunted her presence in anyone's face. never used the children as shields, never manipulated or competed. Her strength was precisely in her gentleness, in the silence that comforts, in the consistency that soothes. And that's why, in that newly rebuilt home, she became not just a wife, but a mother. Not just a woman, but a foundation. Not just the present, but the future. And Bernardo, once seen as not enough by those who only valued appearance, was now celebrated by someone who saw essence. He no longer had to prove his worth, because now he was loved by someone who would never ask him to. It was a cloudy afternoon, one of those where the sky seems to announce tears even before they fall. Bernardo was in the backyard, watering the plants with his usual calm, when he heard soft knocks at the gate. They were hesitant knocks, lacking firmness, as if guilt itself held them back. When he opened it, he found Lívia standing there, her eyes sunken and her expression hollow, like someone who hadn't slept in days. There was no vanity left, no makeup, no high heels, no sweet perfume, just her, stripped of pride, broken inside, finally aware of what she had done. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at him, and in that gaze was more pain than in all the words she had ever spoken. Bernardo said nothing. He waited, until, with trembling knees, Lívia sank to the ground. She sat on the cold cement and then knelt fully, hands clasped like a desperate prayer. The tears fell without restraint, without shame, without control. And then, with a choked voice, she whispered, "Forgive me, Bernardo, not for what I want, but for what I destroyed. Forgive me for trading you away, for humiliating you, for leaving our children. Forgive me because I can't bear to live with this on my shoulders anymore." The silence that followed was absolute. The pain there didn't need an immediate response. It needed respect. Bernardo watched her, and in his eyes, there was no anger, no contempt. There was compassion. The compassion of someone who had suffered so much that there was no more room for hate. He knelt down, faced her, and spoke softly but firmly. "Lívia, I forgive you. I have for a long time. But there's something you need to understand. Forgiveness doesn't erase what was done. It only frees me from what you caused. What you broke, I rebuilt. But not for you. I rebuilt for myself, for our children, and for the one who came when everything seemed lost." She wept like a child, tried to touch his hand, but Bernardo gently pulled away. He said it wasn't out of malice, but because their cycle had ended, that she needed to move on. And maybe one day she could find redemption elsewhere, with a different purpose. But here, in this house, in this story, in this chapter, she no longer belonged. "You taught me what pain is," he said, "but God showed me what a new beginning looks like. And today, my life is not a place where pain needs to live again." Lívia swallowed hard. She listened, silently, to every word. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She knew there was no space left. She knew there was no door left ajar. Bernardo stood up, offered his hand only to help her rise, and she understood. That was the final act of kindness, the last bridge. And as she stood, she slowly turned, walking toward the gate with heavy steps, as if carrying her own judgment on her back. Before leaving, she looked back one last time. Bernardo was already looking toward the inside of the house, where the children laughed with Helena, baking cookies and listening to music. It was the image of the life she had destroyed, and that he had rebuilt without her. Lívia left with a shattered heart, but also with the certainty that forgiveness does exist. It just doesn't always come with a second chance. And that evening, with the sky still grey, Bernardo sat on the couch with his children in his arms, Helena by his side, and a silence of peace reigning through the house. Because when life's justice is delivered with love, it doesn't need an audience, only truth. Lívia now lived alone, a small back apartment rented with the little she earned as a clothing saleswoman in a neighborhood store. Each morning, she woke up to the sound of other neighbors taking their children to school, and that pierced her like a dull blade. It didn't bleed outward, but it destroyed her from within. The mirror reflected more than time. It reflected her choices. Every wrinkle, every line, every dark circle she once hid with expensive makeup was now accepted with bitter resignation. She had lost everything. But what hurt the most was knowing that everything she lost had been given freely by a man who never asked for anything but love. Her visits to the children became increasingly rare, not because of them, but because of herself. She could no longer look into Bianca's eyes without feeling shame. She no longer knew how to talk to Benicio without getting lost in the abyss of distance. The children grew. They matured around Helena, under Bernardo's attentive gaze, who was now much more than a father. He was a mentor, a counselor, a role model. Lívia became a vague memory in some conversations. My biological mum, my dad's first wife, nothing that defined her as home, as comfort, as love. Meanwhile, Bernardo remained steady. His small renovation business became a micro-enterprise. He hired other single fathers from the community. He received honors from schools and social projects. He became an inspiration, not because he was a hero, but because he chose not to sink. He chose not to hate. He chose to love his children and rebuild himself even after being trampled. And in everything he did, Helena stood beside him, not as Lívia's shadow, but as her own light. She was the smile he deserved, the hug that didn't demand, the quiet partner who knew how to share pain and multiply victories. At school parties, Bernardo was welcomed with affection. The children ran into his arms. Helena prepared the snacks. Eduardo, her son, now called him Dad with pride. It was an unlikely family, but perfect in its imperfection. The children grew up with security, love, emotional stability, all the things that had once hung by a thread. And everyone knew, even those who only watched from afar, that man, considered unattractive by the world, was a giant where it mattered most. Lívia, from a distance, watched everything. She still followed them on social media, even knowing that each new photo was a wound. She saw the birthdays she was no longer invited to, the children's achievements she no longer celebrated, the hugs Helena received in the place where she should have been. And when she tried to console herself, when she told herself that life goes on, a strange pain pulled her back, because life had gone on, but without her. One night, alone, with a mug of lukewarm tea in her hands, Lívia stared at an old photo. She, Bernardo, and the children still small, on a simple picnic day in the backyard. He smiled. She did too. The children laughed toothlessly. It was a time when everything was imperfect, yet whole. She caressed the image with her fingers, as if trying to re-enter that frozen moment. But the photograph was unforgiving. What once was, would never return. That same night, in another house in the same city, Bernardo tucked the children into bed, kissed Helena on the forehead, and lay down with a peaceful heart. There were no open wounds anymore. There were memories, yes, but no resentment. He had forgiven, he had healed, and he had won. Not in the sense of proving something to the world, but in the deepest meaning. He rebuilt his own world with hands that once only carried pain, and he did it out of love. Because in the end, there are those who lose everything out of pride, and there are those who rebuild everything with humility.